Well, it looks like Prince Harry's openly talked himself out of any reconciliation within the British monarchy, the British royal family. And I suppose we all realise, don't we, just exactly what Harry didn't say behind that very much guided behind the scenes, interview with the BBC. As ever, let me explain. Morning chums, nice to see you. Thank you so much as ever for joining me today on a new by royal appointment. What we really are going to be discussing today is exactly what I found out since that big interview on Friday afternoon, that Harry decided to sit down and, as you know, discuss everything about the reasons why he feels he should have all of this security. Ravik and, the Home Secretary, Keir Starmer, literally everything was thrown into this particular interview, because what you saw was a man who was very angry, very annoyed, and felt that behind the scenes he's been treated badly. Now, what's always fascinating, and many people often ask this here on the show, is, why doesn't the King, why doesn't William strip them of titles? And each time I do point out that it is an act of Parliament. Yes, the King has a lot of powers, and in the old days, for instance, of, Henry VIII or something like that, could instantly gone out, probably in the Tower, to be honest, if he'd have spoken so badly about the King, that would be the case. But we live in totally different times. And what you have now is a war literally over the airwaves, a war of social media. What we have, if you saw, the other day, was Meghan Markle's picture of behind the scenes, once again, of Harry and, of course, his two children walking in very arty black and white alone into the wilderness, as if, the knight in shining armour. Well, what could she say? And as I pointed out on a recent video, that looked to me like a very loveless, cold-hearted snap. Meghan always, like a lot of people who create problems, they always keep themselves out of the picture. You'll notice that. For instance, when she was having her letter read to her by Jamie on the podcast, there was no sort of flash up of a loving picture or anything like that. The last time Meghan did that was on Valentine's Day, making sure, of course, once again, that she was noticed with her in the picture of Harry looking adoringly at her while he was over in Invictus, Canada, a place where she'd left early because she wanted to look after the children, but then what we saw was her making videos behind the scenes for her brand. What you notice, and this is one of the reasons I've been told why Prince William literally has zero time, and I'm putting that politely, right? Zero time for Meghan Markle, is the fact that it's always about her. She turns every single thing back into her. Now, as you know, when Harry is allowed to come back into England, and he can come back at any time he wants, there was the very first sort of veiled threat, wasn't there, of, I can't see myself, my wife or my children returning to the United Kingdom. Now, let's be blunt here. His Majesty the King does not really know Archie, zero. Doesn't really know, Lily at all. And despite all of the other people that keep coming online saying, they've had Zoom chats and stuff, as I told you, it's absolute poppycock. Never happened. They can't trust this particular individual. So what Harry's done really is try to paint himself a picture of the victim. He can't now return back. His life is in danger. Meanwhile, the clothead, as some people might suggest, goes off to Ukraine with, zero problems. It goes off to Jamaica with zero problems. The problem that he created was all from what he did, the way he spoke out in his book about Afghanistan. And what you'll notice as well, and this is really prevalent in this point, he pointed out the fact that once again he'd had 2 tours of Afghanistan. This is the pinnacle of this man's life at 40. Now, that's not bad. I'm not knocking the fact that he served his country. We are all grateful. But at this point, you should have some other things now to say, and then I went on to do this. You notice he never pointed out the achievements of the Well Child Charity or the Invictus. One might suspect that only comes into fruition as and when it's needed. You understand what I'm saying? But what he pointed out was the fact that, he didn't feel safe back in this country. And yet he came back to fight for News UK. He came back to fight for his security. And the reason really why he needs the security, and I believe this from a source that works alongside Harry and Meghan, is she's perpetually telling him how nervous she feels about her own personal security. Hence the reason we saw her turning up with a 4x4 to go and see a musical in New York. It's it's what makes her feel important. I remember, as I've said to you before, the chat with Ellen DeGeneres. And if you remember, she talked about turning up at the Warner Studios lot and, how difficult it was parking a car and climbing through the window. Another tissue, some people might say, right? But of course, Ellen very, dryly said, a little bit different to today, isn't it? And that really, bypassed Meghan, because what she wants is the attention. She gave away everything she could possibly have. So now her status, her arriving like she's a pop superstar, well, this is really what she banks on. But now, all thanks to her, and it really is all thanks to Meghan, she's cornered her husband, Harry, into a corner that really he can't get out of. And then there's this. Make no mistake about this, chums, the line of questioning was fully agreed, as is everything when you sit down with a person like that. Celebrity. Celebrity rules the roost. They tell you what you're going to say, what you're going to do, and how it's going to be put together. I've done enough interviews to know, and you can imagine, and I'm being honest here, I do not stick to the rules, because my sort of plot is this, that you, the audience, are the most important thing. And I put myself in your position and think, if I was sat opposite, say, I don't know, Cary Grant, obviously hypothetically, or somebody like that, a huge superstar, whether it's Madonna, whether it be the President of the United States or indeed the British Prime Minister, what do you want to ask? Because it's you that's watching. And if I don't really, sort of relate the story, then it's not really, what's the point of it? But of course, you don't get invited to a lot of things if you don't agree. And the first thing they always want you to do is plug their product. You have to get the plug in and maybe one or two questions. And then you've got some vixen at the back of you, literally breathing on you if you don't deliver what they want. Somebody in the other corner looking daggers at you, never speaking, unkind, all of that sort of stuff. That is the setup. So if people attack the lady from the BBC, trust me, she's working under intense conditions. Recently, I did an interview with a former British Prime Minister, and the woman basically said, oh, you can't ask this, this and this. So I asked it all in the first 3 questions, and she just looked at me and I thought, well, come on, because that's what people wanted to know. We didn't want to know anything else. That was the deal. Of course, she never spoke, banged the door on the way out. Do I care? She'll probably be fired in a couple of months because they're always turning people over. Ayla Archwell, you understand. Now, what's interesting, as people realised, is with Harry, literally he wanted to get his points over. But you'll remember in that big speech, he basically said he realised that there will be people in his family that wouldn't like, what he'd done. No, really? Write the book? Appear on the Me You Can't See? Do you remember the sit down with the guy with the therapy where he suggested all members of the British monarchy might do well to have therapy? How does that make people feel about the monarchy? This is the thing. And even at the very beginning, he said, I pulled back the red velvet curtain. I know what truly goes on behind the scenes. These are incredibly private moments within a family. Forget the firm, the monarchy. It's a private moment with the family, right? And Harry has chosen time and time again to rip this apart. Now, here's where this gets more interesting, because while he says that he's forgiven people like Camilla, and indeed, of course, his elder brother, Prince William, the Princess of Wales, even though they've done nothing at all against him other than be accused of being racist, well, there's your other problem, you see. Now, he's forgiven them, and he's basically saying, isn't it time they forgave him? And he's ready for a reconciliation. But note this, never once did Harry actually say, and I'm sorry for any hurt or, unkindness or difficulties that I may have, occurred during this particular period. Maybe I got it wrong. Maybe I'm a little bit hot-headed. I should have maybe thought this through, but in the heat of the moment, I know my family love me. Maybe they could forgive me. None of that. All his fault. And then he dangled that very cruel question about, well, the king. And this is what I've been told behind palace doors has angered the king. Simply because, by saying he didn't know how long his father had left, is insinuating, for instance, that His Majesty the King and palace courtiers are lying to the vast world, the great British public, the Commonwealth, the world, about exactly what is wrong with His Majesty the King. Now, whether you like King Charles or not, what I would say is, just admire the fact that he's going through this, as are many people on this channel, on the show that are out there watching, and to keep that dedication. Yes, he's got all the luxuries around him, but to get up every day, keep going out there, doing the duty, that is admiration. You have to think, well, that's what he's giving us. That's what the Queen instilled into him, duty first. And for Harry to just brush that away really callously, as if, I don't know how long he's got. I mean, well, what should I do, sort of thing, if he doesn't want to make up. The reason why the king cannot literally have any time with Harry is because of exactly that. And this brings me on to the other problem that William, I've been told, is very concerned about, because now it looks like Harry will not be invited to stay in royal palaces when he comes over. And this is because of the twitchiness of the people that work for the palace. They're not servants, they're assistants. And the thing is, can you imagine if you got cornered by Harry? And you're maybe a young, inexperienced person working in there, and you are privileged to certain areas that, you may walk into, you may see people visiting, doctors, all sorts of stuff. And if Harry was to plug you enough and say, well, befriend you, that sort of stuff. And on top of that, let's be honest, the palace are also battling the fact that in the old days, the tabloid newspapers would be sniffing around for money to anybody who wishes to tell the story. But the biggest threat now that the king has is incredibly from his own son. Put that into context, you simply cannot trust the very person that you feel you should be able to unload and unburden on and say, this is what's happening in my life, but don't worry, but things are going well, I'm on the right path. He can't do that. And that must be very upsetting indeed. But Prince William has another battle. One of the problems that you have if you're part of the monarchy is you're not allowed to get political, right? And everybody knows that. But every week there is an audience with His Majesty the King for the current sitting British Prime Minister. And let's not forget, His Majesty's already on 2 Prime Ministers after, of course, the very short tenure of the Right Honourable MP Liz Truss. She, of course, was then, there was Rishi Sunak. Yes, don't forget that. And then, of course, we've now got Sir Keir Starmer. So very quickly, he's on to, 2 gone and 3. Right? Now, Sir Keir Starmer, as we know, is no fan of the British monarchy. He's openly said that, and, it's all very well him changing his mind. And as I pointed out previously to you before, this really happens when you dangle some kind of, award, like to become Sir Keir Starmer. And suddenly, it's a change of heart. Everybody knows that Sir Keir Starmer will go with the wind, whatever suits him. That is the general consensus. And I pointed that out on numerous occasions about numerous things. So Prince Harry, if you remember, when he was last in court last year, basically said that the country was at rock bottom and blamed the government, which caused a lot of problems literally inside Number 10 at the time, and at that point for the Right Honourable Rishi Sunak. And this is because it looks like, and this is what Harry and Meghan are very clever at. It looks like that sort of discussion has happened privately and dropped the bombshell that, well, I know this firsthand. People feel the country's at rock bottom. And this puts the king in a rather delicate position. Now, as you know, I've spoken out before about certain things, regarding King Charles. I think he should keep well out of stuff. But the problem now that Harry did was say, well, Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, should get involved and relook at my security, as should the current Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper. Now, Yvette Cooper couldn't secure anything, according to many people, and there lies your problem. But they're never going to get involved with this. 2 reasons, really. It's a family matter. It is a family matter, and the law has decided that this is what they feel should be afforded to, of course, Harry as and when he wants to return. Now, what the problem was, I was told behind the scenes during the court case, was that Harry could not be very specific about whether he thought it could be 4 times a year, you know, Christmas, spring, summer, and an autumn visit. Now, according to that well-placed source, a very expert legal mind, this could have gone in his favour. You see, if he was very specific and said, well, you know, I want to do that, say, 4 times a year to ensure that my family get to know my children and indeed we can go on a holiday, that sort of stuff. Well, because that didn't come around, when are you wanting to do this? And what costs will there be? And how long will you be staying? Well, apparently, and as ever allegedly, that had not been thought through. And this is the problem time and time again with Harry. Things are never thought through, right? So consequently, what you've got is a situation where they're just throwing darts. We might come, we might not. We might do this, we might not. Now you've got a problem, a bigger problem of, well, what do you do with that? So how do you manage something like that? Now, as I said, what was interesting behind the scenes regarding this was Harry was told by his team, as ever, again, allegedly, that this was almost in the bag. This was the deal, you know. They will understand exactly why he required such a level of security. And this came as a huge blow to Harry earlier on last week when he found out this wasn't the case. And instantly, again, I was told that he would very much wanted to go down the appeal route. Now, when you think about it, you know, the appeal route is another costly experience. And very wisely at this point, but it could still change, Harry and Meghan have decided that enough is enough. You know, maybe they're never meant to go back. But as I also pointed out to you, you know, the true situation about this is she doesn't want to come back here, can't stand the United Kingdom, knows she's not liked, knows that nobody wants really to have her back. I'm sure there are a level of people that still like Meghan Markle, even though she rode on a crest of a wave when she came here originally. But given everything she said about the spectacle of the wedding, the treatment of the Queen, and the fact that only this week she decided to once again disrespect our monarch, Queen Elizabeth, by using the HRH title, knowing full well that this was going to get out and anger not just the greater public, but of course make a lot of pressure on the King, as I say, who's recovering. And in all of this, let's not forget that Catherine, the Princess of Wales, also had her own battles and is still having her own battle because it just doesn't go away tomorrow. You know, there's always the afterthought and the things. And now, of course, what you've got is a situation, and this is where it gets interesting, because Harry now, as I say, is very much in a corner, and this is what's going to be happening. You look at the bigger picture, what you're now seeing, and there's no two ways about it, is the fact that Harry has decided, alongside his wife Meghan Markle, that the family will now never get to really know the children. The only way that the royals see the children is like you and I, on camera, on those little snippets that they decide to put out, with, of course, many suggest not even their real voices. Are they, in fact, the real people? Because we only ever see them from behind. Recently, Meghan talked about how, you know, the two children are at separate schools. And, you know, it must be disheartening when you think, because obviously His Majesty the King has a brilliant relationship with Prince William's children. And you could see, couldn't you, the way that he dealt with Louis at the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, that he is a warm, kind, cuddly granddad. You know, I think he's learned a lot in the sense of that, you know, the upbringing that he came from in that era where it was more cold, more stiff. He's decided, you know, let's loosen up, let's be warm, let's be cuddly. The feeling I got, and this is what I've got from an excellent source, is that Prince Charles, as I know him, but, you know, I know he's the king, but way back when he was simply Prince Charles, he did everything that he could. In fact, probably gave more time and effort to Harry than, in fact, William, because William was busy with the Queen, learning the role of monarch in waiting. That, apparently, was the bone of contention. But what apparently Charles feels very strange about is that never during their long conversations at Balmoral and holidays and skiing and anything like that did Harry ever open up about any of these problems that are now so prevalent, literally, you know, so much in the domain now. And this is where he's a little bit stunned. He doesn't understand how it's got to this point. You see what I mean? And so he feels that, well, he was very open. He talked about things. And let me tell you, his version of events, I've been told from a very good source who's close to him, are certainly not the ones about the demise of Diana in Harry's book. that is all up for speculation as well. But as we know, Harry has been heavily influenced by his wife, Meghan Markle. Now, one might suggest, why would you be influenced by somebody who clearly has no family orientation herself? You know, there's nobody with her. She's on her own. She's ostracised everybody. She dumped a family member claiming that Buckingham Palace said that she could not attend her wedding. And really, as I've said to you before, if this woman had any brains, it would be very interesting to find out that that wasn't the case. But somehow she believes her, right? And somehow she's managed to ostracise Harry from every single person, literally, in his family. Now, one of the things that I was told that Harry really was hopeful for when he came over to fight that case for the newspaper group, if you remember, and he spoke very openly about how he felt the relationship with a former girlfriend, Chelsea Davy, had fallen foul, all thanks to the tabloid newspapers. Well, according to that source, Harry was hopeful that perhaps maybe some chat, some reconciliation with Chelsea might have been on the cards, purely as friends, I might point out. But that really wasn't forthcoming. Chelsea's got her own life, and as I said, is respectful, turned up at the wedding, did the friend thing, but really that's as far as it goes. That book is definitely closed, and it's not one, I've been told, that Harry can really come to terms with. She was a very powerful influence on him at a very pivotal point in his growing up period. Now what you have is Meghan Markle, who, despite what people say, she claims that she could still have an excellent relationship with His Majesty the King, because after all, he offered to walk me down the aisle. You see how these things are phrased differently. He didn't offer. Harry had to go and say, her father's indisposed, would you do the honours? And very graciously he did, after getting permission from Her Majesty the Queen. So, you know, this is, Harry forgets this level of, you know, it's not just, can my dad do it? No, he had to ask permission, because obviously it's not necessarily the right royal protocol. And then, don't forget, she dumped Charles halfway down the aisle at St. George's Chapel. That's the sort of woman she is, never ever grateful. Harry can only see one vision, and the vision that he's being played and painted to by his wife, many people suggest, is simply that of, you know, you only need me. If you remember when Meghan was in the royal family for the nanosecond and she was offered lots of help, she said, I don't need that, I've got Harry. So very quickly she painted herself as a person who just only needed him. And now he's turned himself into Sir Lancelot, solving the problems, making sure that his family is secure. Meanwhile, the very epicenter of what he needed in his life to continue to make sure, well, this could work, they've all gone. They've all gone because they've been pushed away. So with regards to, for instance, the will, many people are suggesting that His Majesty the King will be re-looking at that, as ever, we have to say allegedly, but this is from an excellent source, because obviously, you know, Charles now has to make sure that whatever he hands over to William in the fullness of time, as Queen Elizabeth famously said, has to be very clear and concise, exactly like she did, right? So now, whatever Harry thought he might be entitled to, whatever aspects of life he's got, he's now looking at his own abyss, a very dark tunnel where literally, when those children grow up, it's now going to be him, and if he's lucky, some people might suggest, his wife, Meghan Markle. She believes, apparently according to sources, that very soon she will become a billionairess. This is what she's been sold by the team around her. And this is what she sold to Harry, right? He believes they won't need the royal family because she's a billionairess. Do not forget, this is the woman who has full control over all the finances, all the deals, all dual signed, which basically means that even the money from Netflix, she would have half, should, of course, a split happen. So Harry has literally given his life over to this woman. And so consequently, and as ever we have to say allegedly, the bottom line is he can't move away from that because she controls it. She controls every aspect of his life. Many suggest that, well, until that's resolved, until that's moved on into another aspect, another sphere of life, well, there could be not reconciliation, but even an opportunity to have that conversation. His Majesty the King, as you can imagine, is incredibly upset as to how this has happened. William and Catherine, particularly Catherine, I've been told, feels very sorry for Harry. She was apparently very upset when seeing the interview because she can see that this is a man, and remember, she understands mental illness, and I don't mean this rudely, but her brother James has spoken openly about his battles. She understands behind the scenes, and she can see that this is a man being forced to push forward, and now by doing that ostracizing the only real connection of love, kindness, forgiveness, and the chance of putting your life back together. He's obviously chosen that. Meghan Markle's answer to all of this was quite simple. Here's a black and white picture, 3 people, I'm not in it, but of course I'm the powerful one that you don't see, pulling the strings behind the scenes. And that's exactly how I've been told the British monarchy see this. And until many people suggest those strings have been cut and an agreement being made of some sorts, it looks like Harry, yes, will continue to give endless interviews, but with each interview that he gives, people become less and less interested. The feeling over here, let me tell you, chums, is, well, we don't have any sympathy because, quite frankly, you've had that sympathy. You've had a life of privilege, and it was a job that came with, well, attachments. You walked away from the job. You talk about a life of service, but what service have you actually given the British public in the last 5 years? You've popped back for charities that suit you. What do they suit the British public, who are supposed to fund your security each and every time you decide at a whim to return back to the United Kingdom? It is a developing story. It's not one that's going to go away very quickly. But as ever, when I know more, you'll know more. And as ever also, thank you for watching by Royal Appointment. And if you can, please like, share and comment respectfully. Neil Sean, Kensington, London.